Well, Nate, want to welcome you to this episode of the Solar Podcast. We're thrilled to have you on today. Today, my guest is Nate Jovanelly, and he's coming with us. Most recently, he's working with Enerflo, but he has a long history of working in the renewable space. And given some of the information that's come down, probably those that watch this episode or watch this podcast have been following some of the ITC and I guess what's the new tax code called? What are they calling it? The anti-inflation bill? Is that what they're calling
The
it?
Inflation Reduction Act of 2022.
The Inflation Reduction Act. So formally, it's a lot of the same things that would have been in the Build Back Better program or a few other programs that have existed. We're obviously not going to dive into all of the intricacies of it, but certainly we're going to be talking a lot about that today. But again, thrilled to have you on the podcast today, Nate. And I'd love for our listeners to get a little bit more of a background on you, not just the time that you've had, short time you've had with Enerflo, the software company, but your previous experience working within the renewable space as well.
I started my career in actually doing consulting. I was a chemical engineer by trade and always interested in the environmental piece. In fact, I was able to take a few graduate level environmental courses as part of my chemical engineering degree. Did a report actually on the use for solar thermal back before really solar PV had any traction at all as a college thesis. And again, it was something I was always interested in. I wanted to do environmental engineering, and my brother actually talked me into chemical. So when I graduated, I consulted for companies like Leidos and had clients for everything from NASA to like Harley Davidson, Mott's applesauce, Utz potato chips was an awesome client, Pfizer. So I did a lot of things in the environmental realm and eventually went and worked and led a team of engineers for water and sewer infrastructure throughout the country. It was a large publicly traded company and it was a great job, but the travel was killer. I had 3 kids, so it was time to move on. And I had an awesome opportunity to come work for IGS Energy, which is the largest privately held energy company in the country. So they're a retailer of gas and electric. It's owned by Scott White and the White family. Multi-billion-dollar company. I think they're the 3rd largest residential supplier in the country. So a lot like an NRG or Constellation. And what I got hired to do actually was combined heat and power as a gas supplier. That made a lot of sense on a lot of levels. And I think there is a real need for that technology for just a super high level. For those that don't know, it's basically a boat engine. It literally is a boat engine in most cases, or a turbine that you would put in somewhere that has a high heat load, like a hospital. And the number one byproduct of making electricity, running natural gas through an engine or a turbine, is heat. So if you can capture that heat and recycle it at a high level, you can get super high efficiency and lower your overall cost, and also have the ability to island. If you're a hospital and everyone loses power, you could still have power at your facility. So we got into that. There was 4 of us that started that group. And I think we were maybe 3-4 months in, and we went to PV America at the time up in Boston. And we had our little combined heat and power booth, talking about natural gas, and everyone else is talking about solar. And they're like, "You guys, are you at the right show? You're in the wrong spot." We quickly realized that there was a huge opportunity, especially for a privately held company, to get into solar in a big way. So we started doing that mid-market stuff, less than 500 kW, and started quick, aggregating assets, buying distressed assets, working with companies like SunEdison that weren't financing those, doing nonprofits that aren't credit rated, and we would run them through a Moody's shadow rating to get them so we could actually put them on balance sheet. And if we ever wanted to sell those portfolios, we could. And that was a great success. We did that for a long time, taking those projects, getting our foot in the door. And then when SunEdison imploded, we had some opportunities to do some of the first Amazon projects and ended up being the largest client or customer of IGS. So we own over 100 megawatts, or did own over 100 megawatts of Amazon projects. I've done projects for Unilever, FedEx. But as we got bigger and bigger, I realized my passion was really more in the residential space. I like the small stuff. I've been trying to figure out LMI personally for a long time. So ended up pivoting and ultimately running all business development for IGS in the residential space, where we deployed well over $1 billion. We had worked with many of the largest turnkey installers. And turnkey, I mean, we seem to have more success with those that had their own sales team. So fully integrated, a little bit different than your model, Dave. And there's reasons for that we can get into if you're interested. But we had great success there, and we just built portfolios over time. Ended up deploying about 7 funds, and I think the key to our success was that we didn't have the front end that a lot of the other large TPO or third party owner providers have. When I say TPO, I mean a lease or a power purchase agreement. So a lot of the big publicly traded guys kind of have that box that you have to play in. And a lot of the larger mega regional solar installers wanted to use their own proposal. They wanted to use their own design. And we enabled them to do that. But as we grew, we knew we needed a front end, but we also knew if we built it, that we weren't going to build the best design tool, that you're never going to get consensus from everyone on the best CRM and design tool and scheduling tool. Go down the line, bring in Enerflo. So I met Enerflo in March of last year and started talking about them to have a really awesome integration for a TPO product where these installers could bring any tool they wanted, and Enerflo is the platform that sits underneath. So if you think about the average installer has 8 to 12 pieces of software they use. Again, I just named a bunch of them. And a lot of times they don't talk to each other. So Enerflo goes very wide at the bottom. Think of it instead of like one giant Lego or one closed ecosystem, like maybe a Salesforce. It's made up of a bunch of small Legos, and you can customize your own configuration. And if you want to change your design tool, you don't have to change your whole process because you can just swap one out for another. So that's what attracted me to Enerflo and why I wanted to use it during my time at IGS. And ultimately, after getting to know the 2 co-founders, Pat and Spencer, whom I know you know, I just found that we were very aligned missionally, and that is to lower the cost of solar for everyone on the planet. So I made the very tough decision in December to resign from IGS. I started Jovanelly LLC, and of that, I lead business development for Enerflo. So that's what got me here today.
Well, that was a pretty concise nine years of your career summed up there. So that was a nice job. So we should jump into a few of those components though. So IGS, truth is you guys have been, or IGS have been players in the PPA market for a long time, have had some really, I think, fantastic partnerships, have deployed a lot of PPAs. Currently, IGS, their strategy was to own all of those, own all of the paper internally, correct? And so your funds were a lot simpler, which created some pricing advantages as well, right? So you were your own tax equity, you were your own equity capital. I mean, you could obviously leverage and go out and get debt, but the funds were exclusively IGS funds, correct? Or were you guys raising tax equity as part of those funds as well?
Yeah, so actually, all 7 were a little different, with different tax equity structures, different cash equity structures, but all of them basically had the same debt. So we did get debt against them all, and there were times where we used our own tax, which is a huge advantage in some ways. I don't know how technical you want to get on the finance side, but because if you sell the tax to like a Bank of America or US Bank, a big banks and big tax players out there, you can step up the cost of that system. So if I pay complete $3 to build the system, but my independent auditor says that the system's worth $4.50 because of where it's at, and there's a whole bunch of ways to figure that out. And it's different by utility, really, mostly state, but also utility. Then I can sell the tax to one of these big banks at $4.50. And what that enables me to do is then be more competitive and pay, installer more. So it's not like we pocketed that extra money. We use that to be able to pay the installer more. I think in the early days, some of our advantages were in how we treated SRECs. And we were able to underwrite the whole 15 years of SRECs using the tremendous back end of IGS Ventures, the parent company, to backstop those, which is obviously a very cash strong company. So that gave us a leg up because a lot of people were only underwriting SRECs for as long as you could sell them. And typically, in the auction to buy power, the utilities are buying in 3-year intervals. So they're only buying SRECs in 3 years. So that means if you're some of the large publicly traded companies, they would only assume 3 years of SREX because that's all they could get debt against, where we could go out and get debt against 15 years. So it's no surprise that New Jersey was by far our strongest state when we started, with Massachusetts probably as a close second. Eventually, we restructured and we're always redoing these funds to try and maintain a competitive edge. But I would say definitively that it's really hard to compete in pricing with both, just Sunrun and Sonova, just to name them, so we don't have to keep saying large publicly traded companies. But they they don't have a long track record of being profitable. I mean, it's no secret they each lost over $200 million in 2020, and I don't know the exact numbers from 2021. So we were profitable from day one and trying to maintain that profitability. So we competed more on the simplicity, and that's why I think we appealed mostly to the large turnkey installers, because when you get into the sales orgs, they don't have to deal with the back end as much. So I think it had less value to them because they want to sell for the highest price to capture the highest spread. And there's nothing wrong with that. That makes total sense to me. And that's probably how I would do it if I was running that business. But the large installers that had their own sales organization under it saw some additional advantages in terms of higher pull-through rates with IGS because we were faster, simpler, easier to transact with. And what I always say is we did the 95% really well. So when they would come and ask us, like, why don't you do trusts or LLCs or ground arrays, which now they do all those things. But at the time they didn't. It's like, because we want to be the best at the majority of the jobs. And if you need to go sell some of those others to other players, then they can have them. We don't want to distract from our mission. The other thing I think that we ended up doing really well was, and I don't know if this has evolved with some of the other players in the space, but we did a soft credit pool, never a hard pool. And we ran it through all three bureaus. So we gave the customer the best chance of passing. And as you know, I mean, especially in the last 5 years, the default rate for solar, even through COVID, was very low. I mean, you can see there's a lot of data out there from different publications, but it's less than 0.5% in a lot of the newer portfolios. So I don't think that defaults, I think they're really correlated to the quality of the install. And a lot of times, like if someone's not paying you, it's a result of they're angry at the installer or they felt misled in part of the sales process. So we're constantly refining that to get that down. And this is a topic we can rabbit trail on forever. But I think, one of my missions is to continue to bring solar access to everyone, and it shouldn't matter what your income level is or what your FICO score is, because I don't think that's indicative of whether you're going to pay your electric bill or not.
Well, there's some things as part of this new bill that maybe address some of that actually. So, and we should talk about that a little bit too. But unpacking a few things, I might actually going back to just the structure of a PPA or a power purchase agreement or any third-party owned product. So sometimes they're called power purchase agreements, and they operate by selling a cost per kilowatt hour to an end consumer or to a purchaser of the power. And sometimes they operate as an operating lease, where you're leasing the use of the equipment, ergo you get the benefits of the production of the system that's on your roof. And there is a difference, but to the end consumer, they essentially perform the same. You're paying a monthly fee that's generally reduced or almost always reduced as a fund requirement relative to what they would pay to the utility company. So the question here is, and I'll ask you and put you on the spot a little bit, but why is it that solar, these PPAs and these leases, have a history of having such a big percentage of the market? And I'll precursor that by stating, typically a homeowner, if you're looking at a 20-year or a 25-year cash flow model, does better by owning it with either using their own money, just paying for the system up front, or using either an unsecured or a secured line of credit. Most of those are provided pretty liberally from solar companies at this point. Why is it that PPAs and leases have continued to exist in the marketplace? And I'm not saying that they're bad or they're good, but they do and have had a huge percentage of the market share for a very long time.
Yeah, I think so. Might be my favorite question I've ever had on a podcast, because I always want to debate this point, is that I still believe that a PPA is the best product for most customers. And I know we could do 4 episodes on this.
I'll say that's a little bit of a controversial take for most people that would come on the podcast. So, but I'm really, really thrilled to hear the reasons behind it.
I'm going to go into it right now. Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at what the high for, I'm just going to call it generically TPO. Again, it's third party ownership, meaning the homeowner doesn't own the array, whether it's a lease, an operating lease, it's a PPA. And there's advantages even more, I think, a PPA over a lease. And we can talk about that too if you want. But at the height, and I think this was like the Solar City heydays, it was 72% in 2014 of solar finance projects was TPO. And now in 2021, which is the most recent data I have, it's 23%. So why is that? I think there's a few reasons, and not all of them are good. So first of all, I think what you're doing with a lease is that you have historically low interest rates, right? But also, like when IGS got in the market for TPO, a lot of leases were 15 years. Now they're 25 years. It's really hard to compete with a 25-year lease. Also, 25-year loan. Let me correct myself. It's really hard to compete with a 25-year loan because the customer can save a lot of money. And the other, I think, advantage of a loan is that you can roll in other products and services. You can put a roof on, right, and attach that, or insulation, or whatever, energy efficiency measures. There's lots of different things you can do. So I do think that loans have advantages. For TPO, generally, because of that capital stack we just talked about, you have to give the customer savings. And it goes back to perception of default rates. So you might be able to sell what we would call a bill swap in the industry. So in other words, I'm going to put solar on your roof and you're going to break even. You're not going to save any money year one, but your power that you're paying for the solar is not going to increase. It's going to say it's 0% for 25 years. So you can do that. But generally a PPA, and I would say what people would say against it is, well, they have a 2.9% escalator, which again is no different than the interest rate of a loan, but it has a 2.9% escalator. So if you do the math, if you start at a 10-cent rate today, and it could be all over the place depending on your market. But if you're at a 10-cent PPA today, in 25 years, it's roughly going to double. You're going to be at 20 cents. And to sell that product and to be able to get debt on that product and have funds, you generally have to offer the customer savings. So there's some states just right off the bat just aren't going to work because you can't offer the customer savings. The 0% product is a lower fair market value, which we talked about the implications that has on tax equity. So it's tricky business, right? But the advantages are there's zero out-of-pocket cost. There's zero maintenance. You don't need tax appetite. Going back to serving anyone with a 650 credit score can get it. I think it should be lower, but that's what it is right now for most of the major TPO providers. I think the biggest one that people overlook, and I don't think they even consider, is that it's transferable. So technically, if you move within 5 years, I think that could potentially cause you problems with the ITC. So if you think you might move and the average person only lives in their home for 7 years, PPA often can be a better option. Also, strictly with a PPA, not a lease, there's no production risk. And what I like about the product, just what I like about all partnerships, is that the company that is selling you electricity has a vested interest to make sure that solar system is operating. So they're going to operate and maintain it for you. And it's really a no worries system. Now, worst case, it breaks and you have a TPO provider that's not paying attention, which I don't think that happens very often with who's left in the market. But if it did, you're only paying for the power generated. So your default is you're paying a little bit more for electricity, just like you didn't have solar at all. But you're not losing money. You're maybe losing a little bit of savings. So for all those reasons, I think that TPO is an undervalued product in a lot of markets. I'll also say just that, it's artificially capped too, based on how all the companies come up with their cost per watt to the sales organization. So you can only sell up to a certain amount because, like I said, you have to have 20% savings. So let's say the the rate to compare for your utilities is 12 cents, and just keep the math easy. You get a 10-cent PPA. If that caps out the sales org or installer at $3 a watt, they can't sell higher. Now, for a loan, you can sell as high as you want, and generally you're just trying to beat the utility bill. So in some areas you could sell that same system at $4. So I would say that, for customers that go with TPO, they have an artificial cap on what their actual system cost is going to be, even though they're not paying for it, which keeps their rate generally low and guarantees them that at least year one savings.
Yeah. So thinking about, and the reason, and by the way, those are all valid points, and I think those are all the reasons that people should consider a third party owned or a TPO product. And I, like you, believe that there's a very strong place in the market for the TPO product. And a couple things to think about with it. So the first question that I'd ask you was, why have they risen to such prominence, right? So typically, if you were going to add something to your home, a service, any construction project, you would want to own it. And that's the general mindset of people. And yet, the product has been sold. You mentioned at one point probably 70% market penetration. Maybe it was as high as 80% or higher, actually, depending on the market. Now it's probably, you hear different numbers, but let's just say half or less than half products are sold currently are the TPO products. And so then the question is why do they exist? What is it that makes it? I mean, it's the businesses like Solar City and now Sunrun, said Sonova, and then there are other players, obviously IGS Energy. There are other smaller funds that exist as well that people have heard of or haven't heard of. And so it's that capital stack. And so just maybe going into it. And the reason that I want to go into it a little bit in the simplest terms that we can is because so much of what has happened with yesterday's announcement of this new bill is impacted by that. We're in an industry, all industries. We had a guest on last week that talked about how, basically what they do is he's a venture capitalist. They do impact investing. And he says all industries have risk, and that's true. But this is an industry that has some particularly interesting regulatory risk. If you don't believe me, just take a look at the solar stocks that are all up 30% in the last 24 hours. Right? One person goes out and says, "Hey, we're going to renew this ITC, this investment tax credit," and all of a sudden, Enphase is worth $10 billion more today than they were 2 days ago. That's the kind of impact that regulatory impact that the government has on our industry specifically. But anyway, going back a little bit and talking about the capital stack. So typically in any of these funds, you'll usually have a component, what you call your equity sponsor or your equity partner. And those are the people that are putting up hard money that are saying, I'm going to buy solar assets and I just want a reasonable and responsible return on my money. And then usually there'll be some component of debt. So that's your leverage. So some debt component. And then you'll have a tax credit investor, an investment tax credit. And then you also create this structure entity where you might have someone like a Complete Solar that's selling these products. And then Sunrun might, if I were going through Sunrun, for example, Sunrun would pay me something, and then Sunrun would turn around and sell that asset again to another fund. And each time they do that, there's a step up in the basis so that they can take a higher tax credit. So essentially, before the system is ever commissioned, the end owner of it is going to be a fund that will be able to take advantage of the tax attributes at a higher basis than what a typical consumer could. And that if whomever it is that's listening to this didn't follow that, you are in the majority of company that don't understand it as well. But the point is that there's a fairly complex fund structure that allows businesses to optimize or maximize the amount of tax of tax benefit that they can take by doing these PPAs and these leases. And it should be stated as well that because it's a business entity, throughout the period of time over the last 12 years. So I've been in renewables for 12 years. You've been in for 9. And you can go back even further, probably 2007, when Solar City and Sunrun started writing these PPAs and leases, and SunEdison even before that on the commercial side. The reason that these PPAs and leases really rose to prominence was because there were other tax attributes that don't exist today that were even better. And these were relating to the depreciation of an asset that typically homeowners can't take, although There are lots of CPAs out there right now that are teaching homeowners how they can own the asset in a way that they can actually take the tax attributes outside of just the ITC, the investment tax rate. They can also take depreciation. Now, I don't want to unpack all of that stuff. There's a lot going on there, but the point is that there's a complicated fund structure that exists because of some specific tax code, and that might be changing a little bit. So you said you'd taken some notes. I'd love to get your take on some of the recent announcements that have come down regarding this and what did we call it? It's the I keep wanting to say anti-inflation, but that's not what it is.
It's the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. I believe that's what it's called.
Interest, and as with every bill that goes through the government, they pack a bunch of stuff that's probably not related to anything about inflation. So it's a lot of the provisions that existed in Build Back Better that are making it there into this bill that has a more palatable and friendlier name that's probably going to be able to get through the Senate.
Yeah. So just to close that last conversation. So you're right. There's a lot of advantages of a TPO product that homeowners don't even know. But even more importantly, it's just simple, right? They don't have to understand the tax credit because they're not taking it. They don't have to understand what a solar renewable energy credit is, which we don't have to get into. But it's very easy. There's no money out of pocket, saving money from day one, and you have no maintenance obligation. So it is, some people want to, I always liken it to owning a car versus leasing a car. Some people like to own cars and they don't like leasing cars. Some people want to lease cars. So it's, do you want to own your solar or do you want to lease it, have somebody else own it for you? And I think there's always going to be a need for both of those. But so the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, I haven't read the whole thing yet because it just came out. I just got a copy of it this morning. But for those that want to follow along, on page 344 is the provision for the federal investment tax credit. And how I read it is that it extends the federal investment tax credit at 30% starting January 1st for 10 years through 2033. So right now, the tax credit's at 26%. It was scheduled on January 1st to go to 22, and then the following year, effectively zero for residential. But now this new provision would raise it back to the 30% for 10 years and then phase it out at 26% in 2024 and 22% in 2025. And
2034, 2035.
Sorry, yes, 2034 and 20. Thank you.
Yeah. That's a long way away. It's hard to even think that far in the future.
I know. Yeah, I think that the interesting thing is this good for the industry? And I know everyone's excited about it. I could debate on both sides, honestly. I think that I'm happy it got extended, obviously, but I also think that until solar breaks free of anything that would be considered widely as a subsidy, I think there's always going to be this stigma around it. I do like some of the provisions they put in, although I didn't see the direct pay in there, and maybe I'm wrong because I didn't read the whole thing yet. So you still need to have a tax appetite. There is, I think, a carve out for storage only, which is nice. So your battery doesn't have to be attached to your solar to get the ITC, and that's a whole nother conversation. But there is some margin, obviously, in that customer acquisition cost. I listened to your episode recently with Brian Lynch, who I know and really like, and he was talking about all this in the customer acquisition cost. And I think the last number I saw from SIA is that like 64% of the residential solar install soft costs. And again, that's one of the reasons why I came to Enerflo. We're trying to reduce that soft cost, and there's a lot of ways to do that. But I don't know if going back to 30% forces discipline that I think we definitely need in the solar industry.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. So as a general statement, I usually say I don't like it when the government's choosing the winners and losers, and you obviously saw there was a big swing in the stocks as a result of this new policy. And you certainly could make the argument, and there's a lot of validity to it, that these subsidies sort of prop up bad companies and maybe don't force us to be as inventive as we need to be as an industry. We're competing on a world scale to purchase modules. We talk about supply shortages all the time. Well, right now in Australia, people are buying modules for significant, or not buying modules, excuse me, getting systems installed for less than $2 a watt, where as a wholesaler, I can't even compete with that. There's no shot I could compete with that because of how many soft costs we have here in the United States. The local bureaucracies, the local authorities having jurisdiction, our cost per acquisition, all of these things continue to keep the costs artificially, I say artificially high, because we already have precedent where Australia has 30% market penetration and they install for a fraction of what we do it here. So there's obviously precedent. So that there's something to be said about that. I will say, generally speaking, that I would say that there's a lot of positive things. So I do think direct pay, which you referenced, which we should just talk about what that is. I think that is actually a component of this, although the final wording isn't, I think, all the way out and passed through the Senate. And it also, so a few things about it. One, the idea is it's trying to lower energy costs for Americans. That's actually one of the thesis statements, is we're trying to make energy more affordable for everybody. And our antiquated grid, if we continued on that system forever, we would have ridiculously high energy costs. That's just a fact. And so local microgrids using solar and other renewables is actually a better way to provide electricity to homeowners. And this bill and this plan admit that. People could debate whether that's true, but I actually think that that's actually a math problem that's easily solved. It's not really a philosophical argument. It's just math. It's so much less expensive to generate electricity for a homeowner by doing it on your roof than it is to use this macro grid. Ask any Californian or any person in Hawaii specifically, but across the country. The second thing it does is it increases the American energy security. So the idea is that we become energy independent. That's something that's fairly important. We're trying to decarbonize all sectors. So it does reach into other renewables. So there is a tax advantage and a tax benefit for other renewables. But one of the things that this bill is trying to do as well is it's trying to bring manufacturing into the United States. In fact, while it is a 30% tax credit, a lot of that, at least for the TPO products, is going to require, and it's really more like a 6% tax credit with a plus component to it. So in order to be able to get the full 30% as a corporation or as a business, how and where you source materials, for example, is going to matter. There's a lot of other provisions, and probably I don't fully understand them yet either because this is late breaking news, but each of those things are critically important for people that are now putting these TPO products together, is understanding how direct pay works, how to take advantage of the full tax credit. So there's lots of components. And as with every other bill, it's overly complicated and it talks about a lot of other things. But one of the last things that it does address as well that I think is great is the direct pay makes it so that solar has been in some ways a luxury of the rich for a long time. The PPA and the lease have made it so that people that didn't have, and you called it tax appetite, but essentially, if you don't have taxes that you're offsetting, you can't take advantage of the tax credits associated with solar. So essentially, if you're part of the 50% of Americans that have enough tax write-offs already to offset your tax liability, meaning you don't actually ostensibly pay taxes, or federal taxes anyway, you pay sales tax and gas tax and taxes in lots of other ways. But if you're offsetting 100% of your tax liability that your employer is withholding, and you're getting a return that offsets 100%, you wouldn't actually be able to benefit from the solar tax. And so this direct pay now would allow homeowners and consumers that put solar panels on their roof to actually get a payment that would be equal to the credit that someone that's offsetting their taxes would receive. So I think there's still some debate as to whether that's going to happen. It might be direct pay goes to people like nonprofits and churches and organizations like that. I don't think that the final verbiage is all the way set here. I think that the general layout is in place. There's some consensus around it. It looks like this is going to make it to the Senate floor, and probably as early as even August is what I'm hearing. So anyway, that's compiling a bunch of information from a bunch of places.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I'm sure it'll change. I agree. Yeah, it's definitely going to change, and I do think there's merit to the direct pay, and I think this is just to be clear. Like I said, I could argue both sides but I think this is a big win for the environment. I mean, certainly I support that. That's why I want to lower the cost of solar for everyone on the planet, regardless of income level. So anything that does that, I'm in favor of, and I think that we can continue to lower the cost of solar through the low hanging fruit in my mind is reducing the customer acquisition cost and lowering soft costs. I do agree. And actually, it's funny. I was talking to Spencer, who is the co-founder of Enerflo before this. And I was like, hey, I'm about to go on with your buddy Dave. And is there anything you want me to talk about? He's like, we need more manufacturing in America. It's not what I thought he was going to say. So I figured I'd plug him for that because you just said the exact same thing. I think part of the challenge is if I remember from again referencing the episode you had with Brian, who's definitely an expert in supply chain. I thought he said like a bulk of the lithium still is controlled by China, though. So you could still hit some major, if that's true, you could still hit a major hurdle in getting the materials needed to make the panels, even if there was manufacturing here. So, but I don't disagree with your thesis.
Yeah, well, so what this bill does is there's some provisions for, and sometimes when you hear about these, the government only speaks in billions and trillions now. They don't even speak in terms of millions or thousands. So it sounds like funny money numbers, but there's provisions that the government will actually make money on. So for example, there's going to be loans that they're going to be able to issue for people that want to bring manufacturing, and that could be for HVAC products, that could be for solar modules, that could be lots of different things. So access to capital to prop up a manufacturing facility is actually something that's really important to a business. And again, I'm not saying that the government should be in the lending business, but it's not just a bunch of handouts here. There's, I think, some sound basis for how some of these things have been put together to enable some onshore manufacturing. There are also something in the order of, I don't know how many billions, but there's a few $billion in actual grants that are going to go to manufacturers as well. People that are retooling. Specifically on the auto side, I think if you retool your facility to be able to build electric or more renewable type cars, there are actual grants available for that. And that's actually, again, to try to promote decarbonization here in the U.S. and really across the world as the biggest users of cars per capita certainly is here in the United States. And so, yeah, there's lots of provisions in here. Most of them are a win for the environment if you believe in decarbonization, which I think is our general majority at this point, which is great.
Yeah, and renewables they are winning. It's just fact, much to the chagrin of some folks on the other side. But if you just look at, I posted on LinkedIn this article from, I think it was the Energy Industry Administration or the Information Administration, the EIA, that 100% of power production that came online domestically in the US in March was from renewables. And if you extrapolate that in Q1, even with all these headwinds and tariffs and supply, everything that's already been mentioned on this podcast, solar was up, I believe, 11% in Q1 for generation and installs coming online. And batteries were up almost 200%. It was like 174% or something to that effect. So if you look at the total now amount of renewables that are contributing to the grid in the United States, I think it's 26.4% of the total U.S. generation, while coal is 18.2%, nuclear is just over 8%, and still predominantly natural gas at around 44%. But that's shifting, and we're seeing that. We're seeing the cost of solar come down over time. I'm sure in your time it's dropped a ton. From when panels were $2 a watt just for the panel. I mean, you talk about getting below $2 a watt to build, right? I mean, you can get there in some markets. I do agree that having one of the best things you could do is having a streamlined policy for permits, in super quick permits, regardless of the jurisdiction, because as you know better than anyone, it can be mind numbing. I mean, you could have hundreds of jurisdictions just in 2 counties. So that certainly makes it difficult from an installer standpoint. But I think we're continuing to make strides in the right direction, and hopefully this bill just is part of that. Time will tell, and when we look back, have the benefit of being able to look back in history, then I think we'll ultimately find out.
Well, I'll say that one of the last things that I do support about this bill is that where people have been fairly advantaged, and I don't want to say it's been an absolute luxury for the rich, because that's certainly not the case. Solar has been accessible to an increasing, to more and more demographics. The TPO products make that possible. But if you're a renter, for example, because you can't afford to buy a house, you essentially are beholden to whatever prices you can get from the grid. And your neighbor who owns his house in California literally might be paying a third for the cost of power through his solar than what you're paying for your energy by purchasing through one of the major three utilities there, PG&E, Southern SCE, or SDG&E. And that's unfortunate. And so, and these ITC, these investment tax credits, the way that they work are fairly restrictive about, and because of the complicated fund structure you were talking about at IGS, how you wanted to be very good at what you were very good at. Well, I guarantee putting PPAs on rental homes was not one of those things you guys were trying to be really good at, and nobody has. And so there are a lot of these underserved communities that would certainly benefit from less expensive energy. And what I'm hopeful for, and I haven't gotten all the way through the bill, is that some of the provisions that are being put in place are going to directly impact those communities. And certainly it's part of the thesis statement of the bill. Whether or not in practice it comes to fruition, I think we got to see. And again, anytime there's a tax subsidy, there's someone that's going to figure out how to maximize and optimize it, and hopefully it's worded and written in such a way that some of these traditionally underserved communities are going to be able to benefit from renewable energy. That would be something that I'd be thrilled to see. Um, but there is going to be a significant investment through this bill that's made either through direct pay or into communities that traditionally have been underserved in the renewable space, which is good, which is I'm equally passionate about. Mm. Yeah. So part of those soft costs, to your point, that we talked about earlier, are dealing with the permitting offices, and how well you know flow down at the permitting office matters a lot. And the people that you have to employ to go through the rigorous engineering, structural, electrical stamps that are required in certain markets. In some places you can get an over-the-counter permit for free because the community really believes in embracing solar. And in other places, you're going to spend, like in New York City, it costs you around $3,000 to get a permit for solar. So if you just wanted to put solar panels, you're $3,000 to the city before you can even start in the boroughs in New York. And so those are substantive and material costs that artificially inflate what you should be paying for your electricity. And so those costs exist. But outside of that, it's what you're talking about is these customer acquisition, these creation costs. Is right now, solar remains a little bit of an enigma to most homeowners, and they feel like they need someone to guide them through. And I don't think that that's necessarily going to change completely, to your point. But when you have utility costs as high as they are in some markets, when some well-spoken person comes and helps you put solar on your roof and beats your rates by 10%, that's great. That's fantastic. But in some instances, that same homeowner maybe could have had a reduction of 20, 30, 40, or even 50% off of their electricity rates relative to the utility company. And so one of the things that Complete Solar works really aggressively at is working with the many different partners we have. We have hundreds of partners, literally, trying to make sure that in every market, we're not only pricing to make sure that their businesses can be successful, but we're trying to be socially responsible about how we price to the end consumer as well. And in some instances, that means that we're below really what they could have charged, and that's pretty untenable for most business owners to charge less than they can charge. But as part of our broader goal of trying to make solar accessible to many, we're trying to say, hey, listen, we're in this for the long game. And yeah, you might make a little bit less on this consumer, but in the whole and in the long run, when you install the 100 neighbors and that live in and around that person's house, and you turn it a little bit more into a volume gain like Australia has, and you get some of the cost advantages that you get when you get 30% market penetration. The people that are really in it for the long game, that are thinking about it, like, going to be the real winners. Um, and frankly, it's the right thing to do as well. So that's where solar's in kind of a tricky spot right now, and people that would argue against this solar tax credit would say, we should be able to survive at 30% reduced cost, and maybe would even have a point. If you were going to compare us to other world markets. So
And I don't disagree with you. I don't, just to be totally clear, so I'm not misrepresented. I don't think sales orgs are going to go away. I just think that
never.
there is a large subset of customers that just won't answer the door. So they'll never
Mhm.
get that shot. I don't think it's even competitive with them because it's a different customer base. And I hear that all the time from like, you answer the door for this guy, like half of my neighbors wouldn't even come to the door. And, we're older than what the new generation that's coming in, right? Like I was joke, my kids, they joke about it, it's true. They have a 9 and 11-year-old and they can use the iPhone better than I can. I have to call my daughter for
Mhm.
tech support. So, I mean, that's just the world that they grew up with that in their hand, right? So they get it. And I think that if you look at the things again, like most people don't, or not most, but there's a new era where people aren't even buying, get groceries delivered. You have Amazon, right? Like, why would you ever need to leave your house? I'm not saying that's a good thing. It's not a philosophical debate. I'm just simply stating the obvious that I think that there are companies out there that are doing it. Tesla did it. I think it was kind of half-hearted, but you can sell solar for less than $2 a watt if it's a cash deal and it's just done strictly online.
Yeah, and very much so, to get on the record, I don't think sales organizations are going away either. In fact, I think they're going to 10x over the next handful of years. I think they're going to be more of them, and they're going to be bigger. And that's because we're at 3% market penetration, and there are a lot of people that need to be handheld and ushered into this new energy revolution. So, and that's why we're thrilled to do what we do. We work with the partners we work with. We just want to make sure when we work with our partners, we're always trying to be as socially responsible as we can. And the truth of the matter is that anyone buys solar if they paid $5 or $6 a watt today. Um, in all of the markets many of the markets we're working in, they're far better off than waiting for some time down the road when they might be able to get it for 3 or 2 even. So now is the right time to go solar, and most of the people that are out selling it are trying to do it the right way. Um, we work with some really fantastic sales partners, thousands of sales reps represented across the country, that are doing it, we believe, absolutely the right way. We're just trying to, we want this to be an everyman product, and we want their job to be actually be made more easy by, you take care of customers in a really spectacular way, you're going to have more customers. I just truly believe that. And as a business, we're trying to make sure that every customer has a fantastic experience. And I think we're partnered with sales organizations that also believe that and are aligned with us as well. So, and that's why they're successful and growing. And that's why we're bringing on more and more and more organizations that work with solar all the time. So we're thrilled about it.
Yeah, you're definitely doing it right. And I agree. I mean, I think yeah, and who knows how accurate these predictions are, but I think they're predicting 13% of homes will have solar by 2030. I mean, if you just look at jobs are the job growth in solar, and even if you want to throw wind in there, is 5x the national average for at new additions, right? And I think it's up 160, 170% year over year. And if you just look at some of the mandates, not even state, but just nationally, I think that in order to even come close to them, they're going to have to install 3 times the amount of solar that's been installed already just in the next 5 or 10 years. So I definitely agree. I mean, solar has a bright future. No pun intended. But I think it's going to. I don't even think we're just at the base of the hockey stick, and that was some of the why I rattled off some of those percentages earlier, because I think solar already has as in told terms of total production capacity in the US is probably greater than what most people think. And with the inclusion of batteries now and the battery technology really coming along and the electrification of everything, you're going to need something to keep those costs down. And, solar is an awesome alternative for those that it works, right? Depending on if you rent or own or whatever, you have to be a homeowner, you have to face a certain direction, not always, but can't have mom's oak tree in the front yard blocking the system. So there's a few hurdles to get over. Not everyone is qualified, but certainly I think it's more and more mainstream. I mean, I see it's a large percentage of my neighbors have solar now. I'm in Pennsylvania. 5 years ago, that would have been unheard of. And I see it more and more. Our rates are up, I think, 38% just in the last 6 months. So I expect that trend to continue. And it's getting more mainstream. It's not like, oh, look, that house has solar. I've had solar in my house for years now. I have LG panels. Funny. I was like, oh, this is gonna be the greatest ever. LG. It's funny because the LG doesn't sell panels anymore for this. I know. But so yeah, I put LG up, and I've had solar in my house for years, and I can't tell you how many of my close friends and family, other than me talking about it, never knew I had solar, or somebody comes to my house, they don't even notice it anymore. So I think that, to me, that's anecdotal evidence on some level that it's more mainstream.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. I've lived in California for 12 years with my family until just recently, where we moved here to Salt Lake. And there are two different mindsets in that market compared to this market. Certainly, it was very mainstream in the community I lived there in California. No one batted their eye about panels. Although, if you were at the kitchen table, people would always talk about how concerned they were with the aesthetic of it and things like that. But once they're on the roof, nobody ever talks about it, and nobody hears complaints from anyone saying, "Oh, those solar panels, or whatever." But don't look good or out of place or whatever. It's very, very, very mainstream here in Utah. First thing I did when I came here to Utah is put solar panels on my house, and I think that there's a general curiosity here. My neighbors ask me about solar quite a lot, and of course, I'm happy to talk about it. So that's one of the things that I love about solar is most people are curious and they're just looking for someone to help them answer a handful of questions, and then their curiosity usually turns into them doing something about it. That's been my experience, at least here in Utah, and it was certainly the experience early days in California as well. Yeah. Anyway, I love all the things you kind of mentioned. So obviously Nate, or excuse me, obviously Brian Lynch on a previous podcast. For those that want to go and look that one up, really fantastic guest. One of the smartest guys you'll talk about supply chain and some of the challenges we were actually talking about back then, which we're still going to be talking about, but that was the tariff and the tariff situation. That isn't all the way resolved. And we also had previously on the show, just after Governor DeSantis had shut down the bill that was challenging the net energy metering program in Florida, we brought a couple of the Flossia people, which is an organization down in Florida that was really strongly helping to advocate against that bill, which was going to be very destructive to many jobs and to the energy space generally. Florida is such a fantastic solar market. To think that their energy that market was going to be challenged the way that it was is just a travesty. And so we're really glad that Governor DeSantis made the decision he did to veto that bill and shoot that down. That was a big win for solar across the country, frankly, but certainly it was a big win for Floridians. The people of Florida were huge winners when that happened. I can say that very definitively. So, Nate, I know that it'd be regretful if we didn't talk a little bit about what you're doing right now. So passionate. Well, excuse me. You're now working with Enerflo. Enerflo is a software platform program. You gave a great description of it, and you mentioned that you were pretty aligned with Pat and with Spencer. What are some of those philosophies that are guiding you now, and why you think Enerflo is helping to solve some of those problems, or helping you to meet your philosophical ideology?
Yeah, I think, like I said, our our mission, our stated mission, I think, our unstated mission, I don't know, but is to lower the cost of solar for every person on the planet. And we think that if there's no one size fits all solution for installers, as you know, we talked about just the challenges in permitting, but then imagine having to have all these CRMs that aren't built for solar. And, we don't, you can use Enerflow as a CRM, you can use it for a lot of things, but really it's truly the only open platform that I know of. And that's what drew me to it, because you can pick and choose what design tool you want, or what knock tool, or how you get leads, or if you want Salesforce or NetSuite, or all these different components that can make it difficult to run a business. We could do a business process analysis for you and streamline that, make it so everything talks to each other. If a customer calls in, you're going to know exactly where their job is. In fact, one of the things that I really like about that, I don't think a lot of people at Enerflow talk about enough, is our customer portal. And the reason why I like it, because I've seen firsthand on the financing side the amount of cancellations that happen because, again, that maybe the installer can't tell the customer where their job is, or the customer just assumes nothing's happened because it sits in permits for a month, full circle, right? Back to permits. And in what we do at Enerflow is the moment that lead is created, no matter how it's created, however it comes into you, whether it's a door knock, whether it's buy-in lead or phone call, that customer gets a link that's unique to them. They can click on it, can upload their power bill. We're starting to run credit and do pull their home attributes through title, top of funnel, so you don't get through and find out they're not approved for the whole system amount, or you can't do it because it's on a rental home is a good example. So we'll know all that up front so that the reps are empowered to make the best decisions for that customer. And our goal is just to really, again, increase pull through and increase efficiency, and back having that customer engaged. So as soon as they sign a contract, they get what we call is a pizza tracker. If you've ever ordered a pizza, like, we're making your pizza, it's being delivered. Same thing. We match those milestones specifically to that installer so that the customer can see their journey and they know that things are happening. And if they have questions, they can just chat right in their Enerflow customer portal. It'll go directly to the rep or the appropriate ops person, depending on the status of their job. And we feel that level of engagement we've seen through our data, that it increases the pull-through rate. And anything you can do to lower that customer acquisition cost, I think is a real game changer. So having all your data not siloed in one concise spot, this was something that, while I was at IGS that my partners talked to me a lot about. Like, it'd be great if you had a solar specific this or that on the front end to help us manage these projects so that we can go sell more or go build more. And that's exactly what Enerflo does. And, where we end up 5 years from now, that's the exciting part. Still a relative startup, although this year, we'll have well over $4 billion of signed contracts go through our platform, which I think is a tremendous accomplishment in a very short amount of time. We were about $1.5 billion last year. So that's not leads, that's signed contracts. We lose a little bit of visibility into the pull through rate of those and which ones get installed. But we are actively working on coming up with a really, really slick back end project management system that'll be custom. So we're excited about that in the future. And hopefully next time I see you, we can talk about that and all the things that that's doing for the industry as well.
Yeah, well, Spencer and Pat, I mean, they're both great minds. They work on very different wavelengths for sure, but I'm glad to consider both of them friends. Pat, I think I think he's got a great business mind and a fantastic development mind. And Spencer is, he's definitely one of those guys that has big and wonderful and huge ideas. So I too was interested or curious. I found it curious that he said we need to bring manufacturing to the United States, but I think that's true, and that's what this bill is at least going to part do. So we love the team over at Enerflo. For those that are listening to the podcast that are interested, they can obviously reach out to the team over there and get some more information about the product. It works for people that are installers. It works for people that are sales only. It works for many different types of people, and we're happy to know the Enerflow team. Been very impressed with them, and have done some work collectively between our companies as well. So, Nate, genuinely appreciate you coming on and talking about some of the crazy things that are happening in the solar space right now. Actually, happening really in the country, but affecting the solar space and the renewable space and the decarbonization of the United States and the decarbonization of the world. Really, fantastic background, and we'd love to have you come back on again. And I know that you guys are accomplishing great things over at Enerflow, and but love your hot takes on just the things that are happening generally in solar. So thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to visit with you.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Appreciate it. Next time I'm in Utah or California, I'm going to look you up and we got to meet up. Or otherwise, I'm sure I'll see you in SPI if you're going this year. So I look forward to meeting you in person. It's odd that we've never met after all this time. I'm surprised.
It is crazy. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I will be out there for all of the listeners. So I'm going to be spending some time. We're actually going to do a live podcast from Solar Power International. So I think, what are they calling it?
I'll never get used to that.
Plus or something now. So they're rebranding the name of it.
Right.
I've been in solar for a really long time. I've attended Solar Power International for, I guess it's been about a decade, other than the ones that were canceled that were related to the pandemic. So we'll certainly be there, and I'll look forward to getting together with you.
100%. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on, Nate. So appreciate it.